All right, welcome to another episode of Survival Mode. I am Todd Angelucci, brain tumor survivor, and I am honored today to have an amazing guest. Her name is Jen Pace. She is a brain tumor survivor extraordinaire, board member of the CTBTA, which is the Connecticut Brain Tumor Alliance. Right? I said that correct, right, Jen?
You said it correct. Yes, you did.
Because on one of the other podcasts, I botched it up. So I just need to get in. Greg, that's for you, man, if you're listening. So anyway, I am honored to have her on, and welcome, Jen.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. So, I am just, I read your bio, and of course, we'll have a lot of that in the show notes. So tell me a little bit about what kind of was your life growing, kind of bring me up to when you were, up to the point of diagnosis, and what happened, like kind of what was the before, and then how did all this come together for you? I want to hear your story on that.
Okay, so I grew up in Massachusetts, and my entire childhood was there. And then when I went to school for college, I went to school in upstate New York at Ithaca College and ended up getting a degree in broadcast journalism. And then after college, I did not pursue that. I ended up in New York City working in the fashion industry for almost 10 years, not quite, before I met my husband, got married, and moved to Connecticut, to where I am right now. And so we started a family, and that was in 2002. My son was born. And then in 2004, my daughter was born. And I was working part-time when I moved so after working in fashion in New York City, and then I moved to Connecticut, I tapped back into my broadcasting degree and started working part-time at a local television station here in the Hartford area. And that's when I ended up in 2006 suffering a grand mal seizure, which took me into the emergency room, where they told me, they admitted me. And then the next day I met with a neurosurgeon who told me I had a brain tumor. And I was basically 33 years old, and my daughter was 18 months and my son was 3. And I literally looked at him and said, I thought you were going to tell me I was pregnant. I just did not even
So what led up to you even figuring out that you were getting the diagnosis? So what kind of, were you having symptoms? What kind of led up to your...
So I did not realize at the time I was having symptoms, but I know now that I was. Of course, any one of them could have been excused as just things that we all go through. So when I was pregnant with my daughter, I kept experiencing tingling on my left arm. And I remember noticing that and thinking, do I have something? Is there something going on with my heart? Like, why am I having like this left side tingling sensation? So I did go report that to my primary care physician, and she in turn gave me like an EKG right there in the office and tested my heart and said, actually, your heart is perfectly fine, but it's great, that we have this as a baseline in case we need it in the future. And then I was working at the time at a local TV station, and I recall constantly feeling like I had these headaches, like pressure, in my forehead. And it's, at the time I didn't think much of it. And I would think, oh gosh, it must be a caffeine headache. I guess maybe I didn't have coffee, or my automatic go-to was I'll go get a coffee and that'll help take it away. But they kept happening. And so also I was taking care of my 2 young children because I was working part-time, and, the rest of the time I was home with my kids. So a lot of sort of sometimes feeling low-grade nausea, which every time that happened, it reminded me of the feeling of pregnancy. So I kept going and getting pregnancy tests and thinking, am I pregnant? And of course I wasn't. And then fatigue, but I excused that because here I am, I'm a young mom. I have 2 babies, under the age of 3, running around with them, and then trying to work part-time. And so all of that to me, of course I'm tired. Why wouldn't I be tired? Sometimes I'm up in the middle of the night with the kids, and I had an excuse for everything. I never put together fatigue, headaches, left side tingling, low-grade nausea into one conversation with any doctor where they might say, oh, those are all signs of brain tumor. And I don't even know if I had put them all together that somebody would have thought that, because to look at me, you think you're this young, healthy 33-year-old. Why would we even suspect something like that? But those were the symptoms. So
Yeah. And those are like, because if you kept going to your doctor, this is just my opinion, I'm a nurse, is, you kept going to the doctor, they'd be like, oh, maybe this, maybe that. Like, who would think it would be a brain tumor diagnosis? So you had these symptoms and they are somewhat vague, right? Like
right,
I was very similar to you. Like other than this weird eye thing I had just for 10 minutes, like a week before, the only thing I had was my hand was just like one day I was looking at it, it just didn't move right. I was like, well, something's a little weird. And
right.
the other thing that was odd now in retrospect, for 2 years prior to that, I walk around in hospitals because I did some work with a company, and my left foot would like scuff on the ground, and it happened more often than not. And I used to say to the people I was with, like, what's wrong with me? But come to find out, that kind of was it. It was very vague. So what led you finally to getting the diagnosis? Like, was there a point? Was there like, what happened?
Yes, it was I was at my neighbor's house with my kids and my husband. It was President's Day weekend, huge snowstorm here in Connecticut. And I had it, that's where I had the grand mal seizure. And coincidentally, her mother had passed of a brain tumor, glioblastoma brain tumor, just 2 years before, in the same very room that I had my grand mal seizure, which ended up being almost, how can I say? I mean, it's kind of, it's really, I don't know if coincidence is really the right word, other than it was almost like, in a strange way, a blessing, because it's a terrible thing to call a blessing. But the fact that my neighbor had been through brain tumor with her mother, she knew that a neighbor of ours was a neuroradiologist. So she had the wherewithal to immediately, she called 911 after I had the grand mal seizure, and called the neighbor who happened to be home. So it was like angels surrounding me. And this is what I think after the fact willed me to think, okay, I have got to survive this and I need to keep moving forward, because no human could set this up so well. I mean, here we were in the middle of a blizzard. I'm not at home, I'm at my neighbor's house. I have a grand mal seizure on the floor of her living room. And then the other neuroradiologist happens to be home, for other, which is not typical of doctors. Usually they're working or, they're on call, et cetera, but he happened to be available. So he came down and essentially like mapped out the plan for us. I mean, he called the hospital, called in the ER and said, look, keep the CAT scans open, we're coming in. He drove my husband behind the ambulance into the hospital and was with us the whole time. Of course, because of HIPAA and everything else, I mean, he had told us there's something there, I'm going to get you into the hospital and then the team will meet with you in the morning. So he couldn't really tell me what happened, what I had, but that's why, that's how I ended up at the hospital, Hartford Hospital. And that's how I ended up the next morning when the neuro team came in, and the neurosurgeon I mentioned to you before told me, you have a brain tumor. And of course I was stunned and shocked. And I'm sure I was just in shock because I did not register what he was saying at the time. In that moment, I'm like, who would ever, like you said, who would think, like, who thinks that you have a brain tumor? That's just not on the radar.
It's not. It's funny, like, unless you're super anxious, or whatever, like, hey, maybe it's a brain tumor, in general,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Who would think that? So I remember when they told me in the ER, being in shock for sure.
Mm-hmm.
When did it kind of hit you? Like, tell me a little bit more about how that landed over whatever amount of time.
Gosh, I'm wondering if I don't really know if I don't think there was an aha moment, but I think that my initial reaction was so much about having to have brain surgery. I don't think the brain tumor part of it was scary to me, but what was more frightening in the beginning to me was knowing I had to choose a brain surgeon and go have brain surgery. I mean, I'd never had any surgery in my entire life. Literally, I had experienced like stitches and a broken thumb and suddenly and had 2 babies. But otherwise, that was I never was in the hospital. I never had any kind of surgery. So the idea of having brain surgery, I think I truly was concerned about not making it through brain surgery. I just remember thinking, what if I come out and I'm not me and I can't talk or walk, or, you know, I'm messed up and I just, or I don't even make it, you know? So that was very frightening to me. And, but again, thankfully, I obviously had brain surgery and it was fine. I came out and I expected to make, you know, at that point I was very optimistic. I expected to make a full recovery and was just, you know, of course you're told, well, now we just have to have a follow-up and we have to wait until the pathology comes back. And I remember being a little anxious before we went back in for that appointment to find out about the pathology. And when we did, the surgeon seemed a little put back. He was just like, wow, it's not back yet. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're all the way here and we don't have the pathology. What do you mean? And so he called down and he said, yeah, it's not ready. And I think that's when I first started to feel a little, I don't know if it really made me nervous or just kind of that was definitely disappointing and a little bit frustrating that I've been waiting and waiting for it was like, that was my next, you know, I need the green light, let's go forward. And it wasn't ready. And then I remember when I was home alone and I got the phone call from the surgeon. And this was, I don't know how long, it might've been a week at least after. And he told me, well, the pathology came back, but they're saying it's grade 3. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is a low grade tumor. All I need to do is have it surgically removed and then I'm going on with my life. And when he said that, and he was still very optimistic in his demeanor and his delivery. And he was just like, he still was just like, I just think you should go on with your life and, you know, do what you need to do. And I was just like, okay, thanks, you know, like how you are when, I don't know, but how I am when someone's communicating to me. I'm great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Like, just, I don't know, when you're talking to a doctor, right? And then I remember hanging up the phone with him. And I think that might've been my aha moment because I just, like something came over me, probably a combination of fear and doubt and like, just what in the world did he just tell me? And then I called my husband and just started crying. And of course the emotion took over. And that was kind of a moment for me where that's when I think I realized, okay, this is not over. And I have a road ahead of me that I certainly never, ever thought I'd have to take.
So when you were diagnosed in the hospital, were in that diagnosed period, did you have surgery right away or did you go home and come back?
No, I was able to go home and I ended up, so I was diagnosed on the 12th of February and I ended up having surgery on the 22nd. And in between that 10-day period, I actually talked to everyone anyone and everyone that I could possibly connect to that would have any, 6 degrees of separation to somebody with a brain tumor, just to get advice, just to be, have another person to talk to, counsel. And in that time, we also went down to New York City and I met with surgeons down in New York City and talked to them about what they, their course of action would be like, so. And then at the end, I ended up coming back to the original surgeon that I had met at Hartford when I was told I have a brain tumor and choosing to go forward with that surgery that we had initially planned, which was on the 22nd. So yeah, I had this like 10-day grace period where I was scrambling. Who do I talk to? What did you do? What can I do? Just trying to figure it all out. And that was stressful. That was a tough time. But that was probably the time in my life that is what laid a lot of the groundwork for what it is that I do now and what it was that inspired the formation of the Connecticut Brain Tumor Alliance, because that network that was there for me just because of my, my God-given sort of support network of family and friends of friends and neighbors. And that was what was like lifting me up during the time of absolute just shock and uncertainty pre-brain surgery. And that is what allowed for me to have, I guess, a sense of comfort and of capability in making decisions and feeling like, okay, I'm making a sound decision and this is the right thing to do. Because I just think there's so much uncertainty and confusion when you are diagnosed with a brain tumor, as with probably any major diagnosis. But it's very comforting. At least it was comforting for me to be able to talk to other people and hear from other people who, by the way, don't have the same exact situation as I do. No two tumors are ever identical alike. I mean, they're similar and they may have the same classifications, but every patient's different. I recognize that intellectually, but it was comforting to have that network of support around me, leading to me making the decision, to obviously have surgery. And then even more comforting after the fact when I realized I was going to have further treatment.
So, my experience was very similar. I had been discharged from the hospital and then got my second opinion because I went to a small hospital just because I thought I was working too much. Like maybe they'd say to stop working so much, like who would have
Right.
thought?
Yeah.
And then I get to the I go to the ER, they scan and they're like, you're not crazy. You got a marble-sized tumor in your head. And I'm like, what? And that led me to Hartford, the same place you went. And it was a hard pill to swallow, but I was just very similar to you. Like it was one step at a time. Like I wanted to get through surgery because that's the unknown. Like you go in, am I going to walk, talk, know my name? Like those were the things that went through my mind. And I remember talking to our mutual friend, Greg, and he said, they're operating on the CPU of your body, and it's not like it's your arm, like, hey, I broke my arm and I got to do it. Like, okay, but this is like something else. And these are the things that go through your head, no pun intended.
Really? Yeah.
So that period, I had a 2-week period too, and I was on steroids, which messed me up, kind of weirdly, mentally. I don't know if you had that experience.
I had that post-surgery, and I always tell people, as soon as you can get off, and they got me off pretty quickly, but yeah, that's not pleasant.
And just like you, my surgeon said, Todd, after surgery, he goes, Todd, I'm not sure what it is.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying this. So I had to wait 2 weeks. And I was like, oh my God, but I was just happy I was alive in that moment. Mm-hmm. And then as the 2 weeks, as I started to heal, then I started to get like, okay, now what's next? But my surgeon was always like, Todd, listen, I got 99% of it out. We could just, he kind of gave me, he was such like these neurosurgeons, I have to say, they probably do this like they eat meals, right? They probably do so many surgeries, but how they touch our lives in each respect is just amazing, and how they handle things, because
100%. I mean, I say time and again, I am in awe of their skill level, of their intellect, of everything that they do. It's mind blowing. And I have a funny story about that too, because of course, as the patient, you're scared out of you're just scared out of your wit. And I was going into the OR the day of my surgery, and I'm laying there and I can remember this part. I remember so clearly. I'm laying there on the operating table, and of course it's like the bright lights and and everything else. And my surgeon comes over me and he's like, why are you shaking? And I was like, because you're about to cut into my brain. And he was just like, oh no, it's no big deal. And I realized after the fact, for them, they do it every single day, multiple times a day. And it's like changing a tire. I mean, they're just so they're just so skilled and they're so good at it. And it's, I swear they could do it with a blindfold on.
What's funny?
What really makes you crazy is when someone who does this every single day and sees these every single day turns to you and says, well, I'm not exactly sure what it is. That's what I think just makes you so, uncertain and concerned.
Absolutely. OR story, my surgeon comes out right before I'm going in. He goes, Todd, I'm glad you decided to get this done. And I said, do you think I really had a choice? And we kind
Right?
of joked,
Yeah, as if I have a choice.
and he wheeled me in and they did the huddle. I was telling somebody about this the other day. They did the huddle over me while I was awake. I was like, oh my God, oh my
Right?
God.
Yeah.
And the next day, and I was really blessed on the outcome of the surgery and my experience. And I will always, give number one kudos to that surgeon for sure.
Definitely.
But so you have this 10 days before you really start to rally some support and do research. Oh, my experience between those weeks, I got my will together because I never had one. I was like I'm like preparing like I might not like see
Exactly.
people again. I don't know
Right.
if you had that experience, like you didn't know, right?
No, you're right. I didn't know. Fortunately, we had a will already because we had done that before the kids were born. So I did have that, and all that power of attorney and everything like that was set. But yeah, no, I'm not gonna, the truth is you can't help but have thoughts of, I don't know. I mean, what's gonna happen to me? Am I gonna be alive? Definitely.
Because I still remember this as clear as day. The day my surgeon said there's 5% chance of stroke, something else, and like death, coma. And I'm like, it's not 0.5, it's 5. There's still
Right.
a 5%.
Yeah.
Right. So I was like, oh my God, but I just trusted. I took every step, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, let me take it in bite-sized steps. And the story I told myself, because I was a military guy, was like, if these guys overseas could fight and step on ADs and get shot and they're doing surgeries over there and these people are doing okay, then an amazing surgeon who does this every day in a clean facility in the United States could get me through in the best way they can. That's the story I told myself.
Yeah, and those are great stories because those are the stories that do help us. To your point, it helps you get from 1 minute to the next because you really are living in those moments. I don't think there's ever a time there's very few times in our lives, as much as people say to you every day, you have to live in the moment, but it's really in these crazy times that you truly are in the moment. And yeah, but that's great because I think those are the best ways. I didn't have a story like that I told myself, but when I had to go into the radiation post, all this, I would say a rote prayer to myself over and over. And it was actually a friend of mine's father who had been through his own diagnosis of cancer with prostate cancer, who had to go through radiation, who shared with me, what I did was I just said the words, please God, take away these bad cells painlessly and effortlessly. And so that phrase is what I have said through, here I am, 15, almost 16 years later. Every time I go into the MRI machine, I just say it over and over and over. So I don't give my mind any time to think. So it's just like that rote prayer over and over that just helps to make the time go by. I think it probably in a weird way is meditative, like kind of calms the system. And I can't, the voice in the head can't start going crazy because it will. And within a matter of seconds, just thinking like, what if there's something there? And I don't do this anymore, but closer to the time of my diagnosis and surgery, anytime there was a weird thing like tingling or whatever, I'd be like, oh my gosh, is it growing back? You can't help but have those moments. Fortunately, I think I've just gotten to the point where I know based on the time that's passed and my years and years of MRIs that the likelihood of me dying from brain tumor today is back to the likelihood of really any other person on the street dying of a brain tumor. I'm more likely, who knows, I could be hit by a bus or some other thing. So it's not like, I think at this point, I've also reconciled in my mind that I'll never know why I have it or had it. I don't know what caused it. In the beginning, everybody's like, what do you think caused it? And, I'm like, I don't know what. I had a cell phone when I worked in New York and it always got hot. And I'm like, it might have been the cell phone. You come up with all these things, but I don't know. And I won't. I don't really know. I
Can I
won't know
tell you something silly I stopped doing ever since my brain tumor?
what.
I don't microwave my food anymore.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Call
Yeah,
me
I've heard all kinds of, right. People, well, that's not so silly because growing up, my mother was like anti any of that. And when we finally did get one, she would yell at us never to stand in front of it while it's cooking. Yeah.
Wow.
And, again, though, it's amazing how you become. So right after, I would never hold the cell phone up to my head. I would only do the speaker. And again, I don't know. I mean, I know friends of mine who do believe that the electromagnetic waves that are emitting off of it could be cancerous, but like I said to you, who knows? I mean, you could sit there and make yourself crazy about so many things in this world, and I already do enough of that with just regular stuff. I don't need more.
So you get through surgery, you get this diagnosis, they find out what it is. So
yeah.
So tell me how things progress from there.
So that is when I started to try to figure out what am I going to do for treatment? And I then started again on my same sort of path of calling anyone I knew, calling local doctors. The suggestion at the time was I could do nothing. I could just do radiation. So I did go and meet with a radiation oncologist who suggested yes. I advised we do radiation, which was the IMRT, which is when you have to have the mask made. And, anyway, I did end up doing that. And then the other was the suggestion at the time was sort of do nothing, just wait and watch and see if it regrows, at which point then we would suggest doing radiation and or chemo. And then the other option was just to go forward with radiation. And actually I went down to Yale New Haven Hospital and consulted with the neurosurgeon at the time was Dr. Joe Pietmeyer, and their neuro-oncologist was Dr. Bering. And I consulted with them, and Dr. Pietmeyer had said to me, this is what you're going to do. You're going to do the radiation and chemo simultaneously for, I think the standard was 7 weeks. And then you can follow up with a cycle of the chemotherapy, like on a lunar cycle. And that's what we're going to do. He was basically the only person, and I credit him for curing me, because he was the only person who was definitive like that. Everybody else I felt kind of just, and I understand it, the medical community and liability and all that, but it was always, well, you could do this or you can do that, and then of course they list the side effects, and everything has side effects. So at some point you just jump in. And ultimately like I had shared with you earlier, my deciding factor was, I thought, I'm 33 years old, I'm otherwise healthy, and I have 2 children under the age of 3, and I'm not going anywhere. Like I'm not ready to die. So I want all the ammunition that exists to get rid of these bad cells, whatever it takes. So I was a bit of a guinea pig, because then I went down to New York City and met with a doctor at Cornell Weill School or Hospital. And she said she was great. I again credit her for my care, but she said, well, what do you want to do? And I told her, I want to do the oral chemo and radiation simultaneously. And I want to just get rid of this. And she was like, okay, let's do it. And she was my quarterback, I'll say, because she called the shots, but I was able to do everything through Hartford Hospital. So she helped me connect with an oncologist, not a neuro-oncologist, just an oncologist at Hartford Hospital that oversaw my care and could order the chemo for me. And then I was doing my radiation at Hartford. So everything I did therapeutically was done close to home, which was a big help because I could be at home. I didn't have to be out of state. And also, it was easier for friends and family to help support me and drive me to radiation and all that. So.
Wow. So yeah, that's gotta be a tough decision. And, and when they say you can make that decision, I don't know. I think that's a hard decision to make. So you were blessed to have that doctor from Yale to really give you some guidance for that, for sure.
For sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And I'm not going to say it was an easy decision, because I think a lot of it too was probably me being just jumping right in, and and even as the years have gone by, I don't know what people say to me. Oh, well, what side effects have you had? I I really don't know. It's so hard because it's not like there was anything that happened. I was very fortunate with my initial treatments. I mean, as they say in the medical world, I tolerated everything well. So, well, that's good. But as far as things like, I mean, I've struggled so much over the years with energy levels and, like high highs and low lows. And in the beginning, my oncologist said, well, that could be because I took the anti-seizure meds for years too. So I was not only, I was taking Dilantin, and then I was taking the oral chemo and the radiation during that period. And then after that, I did the oral chemo 5 days on, 28 days off. And I was a bit of a guinea pig with this too, because nowadays they know that there's no benefit to do that for more than a year. But I did that for way more than a year. So we didn't know back then. And at the time my neuro-oncologist was saying, let's just think of it like blood pressure medication. If it's keeping the tumor at bay, then just keep doing it. And it was a low dose. So I guess it was the rationale was, well, you're on a low dose chemo, 5 days on, 28 days off. It could have been forever if I finally said, after it was probably close to, well, so I didn't do it every 28 days for a full 5 years. As the years went on, I would say to her, can I stretch it? Like, I'm not, the whole chemo thing is not pleasant, but I tolerated it. So I did that, and I would stretch it. Maybe I'd go every 35 days, 5 days on. And then, so over time, but I stayed on a regimen of that for almost close to 5 years, which again, now they know a year is the maximum benefit. So,
Okay.
but here I am.
Here you
So
are.
I was a little bit of a guinea pig for sure, medical guinea pig back then.
And so over the time up till now, you've had some good scans, I'm assuming.
Yes, I've never had regrowth.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a couple questions about a little bit about what you're doing. You mentioned that you started to really build a support network really prior to surgery, right?
Mhm.
And you started to get involved with the community or bringing people together. So tell me tell me a little bit more about that for sure.
So it was really very organic in that, like I mentioned before, my neighbor at the time, she had been through brain tumor diagnosis with her own mother as a caretaker, she and her sister and her husband. And so we, of course, were very close prior to this, and then continued to be. And then by coincidence, meeting Tracy, who was only a town away. So it was the three of us that started talking, along with our husbands and family members, about wanting to do something to help other patients. And I think the goal really was, again, mostly it was all about support, like that emotional support that we talked about, and that I felt through my own group of, my close group of friends and family I was blessed by in the beginning. So it was, how do we create that for other patients? Because we truly didn't want any other patient to have to go through what we had been through alone, and to not have that feeling of support. And I think we quickly recognized how blessed we were, and how not everybody maybe has that, or has the confidence to reach out. I mean, I was calling people. I'm trying to think back, like I called a cousin of mine who I knew, of course, but was much older than me, had, it was like 6 degrees of separation. So her college roommate had a brain tumors, a person I've never met. And I said, do you think she would be willing to talk to me? So I was taking the initiative on my own after my diagnosis, and that was pre-brain surgery. So I just wanted to call her to see if, like, I want to talk to somebody who's had brain surgery and know they can talk, to your point, you don't know if you're going to come out of brain surgery. Nobody knows. And I know that now, but you just don't know if you're going to be able to come out and walk or talk or anything, what's going to happen to you. So for me at the time, I just needed to talk to somebody who'd been through brain surgery that I could then talk to and ask questions about their experience. So we, in our formation of thinking about forming something for other people, wanted to be able to be that person to call. Not that we have the same diagnosis, not that we have the exact same experience, but we can take a call from somebody, anybody, it could have been you, and just speak to you if you have questions, or you just want to hear what our story is, we can share. And it's really about just providing that human support system for people when they're diagnosed. So our goal was to help patients and caregivers from the onset of the idea of let's form something. And it became, what do we call it? And we chose Connecticut Brain Tumor Alliance. And the way we made money, the first thing we did was have a golf tournament. And so we raised money. And then what we did was give money back to our local Connecticut hospitals that are brain tumor care centers. And at the time we consulted with them to say, what is it you need? Like, how can we help brain tumor patients? And it's run the gamut. I mean, it's evolved just very organically over the years. In the beginning, we had helped to pay for a special chair at Hartford Hospital that people going through radiation had to sit in. And, so a piece of equipment. And then as the years went on, as we raised more money through events, it's always been event driven. And as we've now started to become better about trying to fundraise in other ways, but in the beginning it was events. And the money that we made would be given back to the brain tumor care centers here in the state of Connecticut. And we set up patient assistance funds so that if patients are going through treatment and they're falling on hard times, there's money at these hospitals under a CTBTA patient assistant fund that they can tap, the social workers can help them tap into to help pay for things like bills or it depends. I mean, but that's all handled through the social workers at the hospital. Because we can't, with HIPAA and privacy, it's not like people can just call us and say, hey, so-and-so just got diagnosed. I mean, it has to be done professionally through the hospitals, but we can, if somebody comes to us by word of mouth, we can tell them, hey, we have a fund at wherever that, if they're being treated locally, we have a fund. And if you call so-and-so, we can call so-and-so and say, hey, we spoke to this patient. Can you please help them? So we're able to help in those ways.
That's awesome. And one of the things I spoke to Greg about, and if you haven't heard of Greg, he was on an earlier podcast, look in the show, and his wife, Tracy, who has now passed from a brain tumor, has an amazing interview that I kind of put on to the end of it, which I even go to. I was telling Jen before the show, that when I need some comfort or, just some reassurance, listening to her share her story and some of the good things, just her energy was just really amazing. So
yeah, she is a bright light. She was one of the co-founders, it was Tracy, myself, and Stacy. And Tracy, one of my dearest friends, just one of a kind. And we miss her dearly, but she just had a great energy about her. And no matter what, under the worst of circumstances, pulled herself together and was a bright light in the room, always. Yeah, great energy.
Yeah, for sure. So that's amazing that, and getting back to the point, like, some patient assistance, because that was one of my fears. Like, I was like, oh my God, what if I can't work? Like, like, what if I can't do things,
Yeah.
the way I used to do? What does this mean? Because it's life-changing for sure, and there's a lot of diagnoses and things that are life-changing for sure, but it's like out of nowhere. And sometimes you need help. And that's what I love about your organization, and they'll help patients that need some assistance with things, and that's a great thing for sure. So so tell me a little bit about what this being diagnosed, kind of going through it, making these decisions, like what was kind of going through your head? What was how did you deal with it emotionally? How was that for you?
Mostly, I mean, my main support system was truly my husband and my family. But there was a time when I'm trying to think back now. I think it was after surgery, and probably during the time that I was doing the chemotherapy, radiation. I don't know if it was after that, but it was, where I did go to seek just outside counseling and talk therapy, I guess you would call it. And I did go meet with a woman on a regular, I think it was thinking back, it was probably a weekly basis, just to talk things through. Because yeah, there was a lot of uncertainty and struggle around what just everything we've talked about, like just what you don't plan for, what you didn't expect. And then you're sort of in this new world that was nothing. It's not like you ever choose to be here. And I know I've met people who say that, I'm not one of them, but I do know a lot of people who say like, oh, cancer is the best thing that ever happened to me because it made me really appreciate life. I mean, I kind of felt like I appreciated life before, and this has definitely made me appreciate the blessings of my family and my friends and my support system, because I am absolutely blessed with wonderful support around myself. But, and it's only given me that much. I guess the gift would be that it's given me that much more sort of desire to make sure that other people want to share that with other people. It's like that, those great feelings of support. I mean, that's probably what's driven the whole idea of we have to help others. But I feel like I'm losing track. What was the?
That's okay.
Oh yeah. So I did seek talk therapy, and there was a long period of time where I would go and sort of talk through, what now, and where do I go from here? Because it completely changed my life. And I don't think that, it's not an easy thing. Like, I just don't, to your point, I can't imagine, right. The idea of not knowing, like you said, what if you can't work and all that, because that's true for some people. Some people can't. And we've worked with people who are in those situations, and it's terrifying. And I will say, like, it's not easy. It's unfortunate. There are groups out there though that do help. And I say all the time, 99% of what we worry about doesn't really happen, but there are people who are in really tough situations, and somehow, there's blessings that come along. But I'm not going to say it's pretty. None of this is, it's like, you don't wish this on your worst enemy, but at the same time, I know I'm very fortunate and blessed to be here, because I sadly have met so many people who are not. And, that's unfortunately the hardest part of this diagnosis, and brain tumors in general. It bothers me that we're sitting here 15, 16 years later, and generally the standard of care for, like the glioblastoma is the same as it was back in, 2004. So it's still radiation, chemotherapy, radiation, surgery is always first if you can, if it's if they're able to operate, and then radiation and chemo. I mean, there are some therapeutics and some other advancements now with immunotherapies, but not enough. I mean, just like Tracy always said, how come we don't have, like, how come brain tumors, like we don't have like the pink party, like the breast cancer people. And that was one of our, that was famously Tracy, right? Like, I want to have a color, I want to have jewelry, I want to have all the bling, so we've worked to try to make changes over the years and to highlight brain tumors, because it's sadly not well known really, even though it's such a devastating diagnosis and takes away so many loved ones. And it's the leading cause of cancer deaths in pediatric patients, cancer deaths. And then even for men, at 20s to 30s, it's the leading cause of cancer death for men, in the 20s to like 30. I don't want to quote and misquote, but it's like in that age range, which, we just tirelessly work to try to change because we want to see progress.
Yeah. And, I work in healthcare, and I scratch my head because I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like more people are getting cancer than ever before. Like more breast cancer, maybe more brain tumors. I remember my neuro-oncologist said this to me about my brain tumor. He goes, I was at MD Anderson and I rarely saw these, but in Connecticut, I've seen more. And
Right.
he goes, I may study that, and so who knows, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
For
I know
me,
we've asked those questions over and over again. And I know there have been some studies done that typically conclude that's not that, they've year over year, the hospitals tell us that there are increased numbers maybe coming to the hospitals, but they think some of that is due to just the more diagnosis in terms of ability to diagnose, and more people seeking treatment here locally, as opposed to going out of state. And I hear you though. I know it doesn't it just seem like anecdotally, like there's just so many more?
Yeah, and I
And then
don't,
you
like I said,
wonder
I
if
don't have
people
any
just,
data. It just seems like more people that are just, and I don't know what it's about. For me, I chose to view the brain tumor diagnosis as like, what can I learn here from this, like about myself? And I
Mhm,
think the biggest thing was that I was like a lot of Americans, probably just working and
mhm.
just, and that's why I named this survival mode. I was kind of living my life in survival mode when I really didn't need to, honestly, but like work it and do this so you could do this and so you could do this so you could retire, right? And I think a lot of people think that, right? And
Oh,
then
yeah.
what I thought was like, are you kidding me? Like, I may not be here for a retirement, or, what's really important. And I learned really quickly, like the job really didn't matter. They could find somebody,
Mhm.
of course you need money to survive, pay your bills. I'm not saying that,
Right.
but what really mattered was my relationships with people, having conversations, and really helping other people. Like I just asked myself, like, it kind of had me self-reflect, because earlier, what am I? I'm a year and a half out of this, right? Which isn't that long, but it is kind of,
But,
you
yeah.
know, you know what I mean? And I sit there, and probably for the first 7, 8 months, I was like living my life from scan to scan.
Mhm.
Like, you don't know. You just don't know. Like an average person that doesn't go to the doctor, like, or whatever, is like, oh, okay, 80, 70, whatever, right? They think that,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
then, you get something like this, you're like, this could get cut short here. So I got to yeah, I got to figure this out. Like, did you ever have thoughts like that? Like, in your journey, like, hey, this is
Oh,
my
yeah.
life.
Yeah. No, no. I mean, I definitely had, probably, I don't think there's a thought I didn't have. I mean, I remember thinking to myself, okay, if I don't make, I didn't do this, like you said, how you started to act on things before surgery. But there was a moment in time where I thought, okay, if I don't make it, should I be writing cards to my kids for the next, for their birthdays up through whatever age 20 or something like that? Should I be planning for me not to be here? And then I remember thinking sometimes, like, if I don't make it, will my husband marry somebody else and there's going to be another mother for my children, and who would that be? And you just like go through these thoughts of what will be, and if I'm not here, what will be. um and that can be, I feel like that can be, it's just normal human. How do you not have those thoughts? But I also think that you can really let yourself get kind of dark, if they can
Sure.
spiral down pretty quickly. And then I would kind of come full circle, because I do remember thinking, well, I would want them to have a mother, but I would hope that she's very loving to them. And I mean, I would want my husband to have a life. Like, I obviously don't want him to spend the rest of his life without anybody, and I would rather him be happy. And, I think I would come back around to hoping for the best. And so I think that a lot of it for me was, the word hope took on great meaning. Like, I too, my one takeaway was definitely the revelation that what's really important in life. And obviously it's not the job. Yes, we do have to make money. And I was very fortunate because, and I hated this too, it's sort of a double-edged sword, because I didn't have to work because my husband had a very good job and he could support us. But I also hated the fact that that puts all the pressure on him. And I had before, I always thought that I would be a real contributor, like a financial contributor to our relationship. And, that changed a lot over the years, in that I didn't really do what I thought I would do. And so that could be, that was hard. That's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, because I felt it makes you feel bad about yourself. And I felt like I'm not really a contributor. And, um, I didn't want to be putting that kind of pressure on my family, so that's kind of some tough stuff, but nothing's preventing me from, I say that, and then again, I really could go out. Most of my time has been dedicated to my kids, and then this Connecticut Brain Tumor Alliance, because that is my my outlet for helping other people. And I will say, I think my takeaway has been, it's very it feels good, and it also, I recognize the need to be able to listen to and help other people. And I think, like you kind of said, what's the purpose, or what is, now that you have a brain tumor, like why, and how does this change you? I think for me, it did make me realize that it's important to help other people. Not that I wasn't the kind of person that would help people before, but I recognize that. And I also think that I realized that it makes a difference, because I know that now, because people have told me, it's really to be able to just be there for people in their time of need. I guess that's probably what part of the reason why I'm here, why I'm still here. So I do have a sense of that duty, I guess I'll call it, or maybe that's not a very nice word, but just being able to help offer some hope to people, especially when they're in a really dark place.
Yeah. So what would you, for somebody that's in a dark spot, right? That's having a hard time with this.
Mhm.
You talk about hope, which I love. Tell me, share with me a little bit more about the hope, and what's kind of some of the things that some people that may be going through a dark spot would be helpful for them.
Sure. So it's always so individual to the person in terms of their own circumstances. But I think you mentioned it earlier. A lot of it is trying to, as best you can. And again, I don't take any of this lightly. It's so many things are easier said than done. But little by little, try to just take that, one step at a time, one day at a time. And a lot of it, sometimes just being able to talk to somebody. I feel like sometimes just being able to talk to somebody about the circumstances that they're going through, because, this is not pretty stuff. And not everybody is comfortable talking to you about it. And I've often said, I don't care, you ask me or share anything, because I don't think there's much, I'm okay to listen to it, and I'm not going to judge any of it. So I think it's about being able to be with a person and not hold them in any judgment, and just letting a person be able to speak what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And there's no wrong feelings. I think there's this real chasm, there's a divide between our intellect and our emotion. And so many people, I think, get caught in the emotions are incredibly overwhelming, and they hit you at any time of day, night. I just remember even saying you talked about living from scan to scan. And I've spoken with patients where they are a nervous wreck. And even my close friends, Tracy, I would tell Tracy all the time, whatever you're going through, I don't care if you call me in the middle of the night, just call. If you because you're in a place, where you just can't, you feel like you can't deal, call. Because sometimes it's just a matter of being able to do something like that, right? And have somebody to call, and you just want to have to, and it may be so unreasonable, and you're thinking, I'm thinking these crazy thoughts, but you just need to talk. That's the kind of thing that I think is important for people to have, that person. And, so I don't know if that really answers your question, but
It
I guess
does.
in some ways, that knowing that you have, it's a lot like a support line kind of thing. Not that we are that officially, but individually, I have offered that to people I speak with. I pretty much universally will say, call me whenever. If you need to call, please call. I'm happy to take your call and just chat, whatever it may be for.
Yeah.
The MRI thing, I think that is the old saying, time heals all wounds. It's a matter of time. I was fortunate, like I said, obviously you get nervous in the beginning. I think in the beginning, with any diagnosis, it takes time to just calm down from the shock and it's terrifying. But as far as living, people will say to me, like, how long before you didn't freak out about the MRIs? Or for me, I didn't have, I mean, if people are really nervous during an MRI and they can't be calm, I'm all for do whatever you need to do. Let your doctors know. If it's about having to take an Ativan because you freak out in that machine, go for it. I mean, I never had to do that. I was lucky, but hey, whatever it takes, right? Just whatever it takes to be able to try to stay calm and get through that experience, because you have to do it. I mean, it's the only way the doctors can help you.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely an advocate of people doing what they need to do to help themselves get to that next step.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like if you had to give somebody any guidance, on just anything, around the situation, and you probably talked about it already, what kind of guidance or advice would you give somebody that's maybe newly diagnosed or just kind of going through some of the stuff with this? What kinds of words of wisdom would you impart upon somebody?
My personal advice, and I tend not to give out advice too much unless I'm asked. I think I respond to people's specific questions, but not like generic advice. But my personal advice would be to try not to, I think people can really beat themselves up when they're allowing themselves to question constantly why, and, or, try to figure things out with logic and intellect when so much of this is beyond that. Like there's a vast sea of uncertainty that surrounds this diagnosis. And so if somebody is saying, what advice do you have? I don't know if this is that worthwhile, but I would probably say to them, try as best you can to, stay focused on the little things, like control what you can and let go of what you can't. Sort of the whole let go, let God phrase, like that would be probably my advice. There's very little of this that you can really control, but there are certain things, and and for different people it's different. I think if it makes you feel good to eat healthy and change your diet, and if you suddenly believe that it's like, you want to eat organic foods, go for it. If you are the kind of person, like you said, you don't want to have anything in the microwave, go for it. Whatever is going to help you feel better individually would be my advice, and that's going to be different for every person.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I did think it's funny that you say that because I didn't really think about it, but I dove deep. I'm like, okay, what do I do? And let me eat better. Let me do this. And it's funny, my neuro-oncologist is like, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, no, and doctors have told me too that they don't believe any of that. Like I had my my neuro-oncologist said to me, she's like, I don't believe in taking anything away from anybody. So she never would prescribe, like a Whole Foods organic diet or anything like that, because her focus was, and I get that. I do get that too, because then again, if you're a caregiver of somebody and I've witnessed this, someone who's losing their parent or God forbid their child or whoever, in those last moments, you want to see the joy and enjoyment. And if what's joy is a hot fudge sundae, then you let them enjoy that, right? It's all about like, make those moments special, whatever it may be. So if that is what is going to bring joy to someone who can hardly, walk or talk anymore, go for it. I don't, like I said, there's no judgment. I think that you just do the best that you can to find those little things that can bring joy to, whether it's your loved one or it's you individually, whatever. I mean, and those are different for everybody, but I think that there's no right answer, because you know what? There's no right answer for even treatment with any diagnosis. I mean, doctors, and you're a professional, in the healthcare world, it's a bet, right? These are like best guesses. I mean, I told you I was a medical experiment because they didn't know what the best course of action was at the time back in 2006 or 7 for, Temodar and brain tumor outcome. So I was just taking it, think of it like blood pressure medication. Okay, you could be on it for the rest of my life. Like it was indefinite. It wasn't until there came a day when I said to my neuro-oncologist, what if I don't take this anymore? And she said to me, well, you could be fine. You could have regrowth, at which point we would have you go back on and see if it still works and it keeps the tumor at bay, then you just back on it again. And if it doesn't work, we have some other things. And by then, I mean, as a brain tumor patient, I always tell people, like, I guess we're trying to hang on until the next great treatment comes along that they discover, because if we can just get beyond today to that next great treatment, that might be the key to our cure. So it's like constantly hanging on for all of that research to catch up. But so when I was telling her, I think I want to stop, she said, well, if it doesn't work for you, if it comes back and it doesn't work, then we can try some other things. And they had, at that point, like Avastin had come about, which, some things have come and gone and some are still in use. But so, I, again, had to make my own decision. There's a lot of this that it's a leap of faith and you make your own decisions and you do them with the consultation of the medical professionals. And we have to make our own best decisions and I know it's not humanly possible not to second guess, but try not to second guess ourselves too much and just try to focus on the positive as best we can. Not easy, easier said than done. And, keep moving forward. I think it's like one step at a time. You just have to keep moving forward.
One day at a time, for sure. One moment at a time.
Yeah, one day at a time. There was a song.
Did you have any residual effects from the surgery or anything like that? Or are you pretty?
I don't know. I mean, nothing so dramatic that I can point to it, but like little things you talk about. Well, I mentioned before, I think the biggest thing that I've dealt with over the years is, and I have all kinds of excuses that are not related to cancer. I'll say, oh, it's gotta be, I thought it was hormonal, this or that, but it would be my energy levels are I struggle with them. So I honestly, like I'll have 2 weeks of where I'm like, I feel like I have just great energy and I can get, I can climb any mountain and get everything done on my to-do list. And then I fall into these like weeks or days, and it's just frustrating because I feel like I'm walking sometimes in circles. And again, in the beginning, I thought it was the Dilantin, and so, I mean, I was on that for years and years and years. And finally the oncologist said, well, how about let's try going off that, see if that makes a difference. Well, I dropped that. Didn't really make a difference. I don't know. I honestly don't know. And then a fellow board member of mine, just said to me the other day, she's like, oh, she's now facing a recurrence and not sure if she has to do treatment. And she's like, oh, everything I hear about radiation is the side effects are so bad. Have you had side effects? And I'm like, I don't know, I really don't, like, because so many things like that I'm describing could just be me, it could be psychological, it could be my age, it could be how I would have been anyway. Maybe I wouldn't have had a brain tumor, and maybe I still would have had those fluctuations in my, for years I thought it was hormonal. I've gone to naturopaths, I've gone to, you name it, functional medicine doctors. I've tried vitamins, I've tried herbs, I've tried tinctures. I mean, I try to eat healthy, all of that. And I don't know, you wonder how much we do just sort of trying to figure it out. So.
It's funny. I dove deep into diet, I really did. And I studied a lot of different things. And I found, I like certain things for sure. And I found what makes my body function better. I could feel it.
That's
the big missing piece that like I retrospectively look at, and it was just an eye opener. I don't think it had anything to do with the brain tumor. Maybe not. Was just like the amount of stress in my life, right? Like that does cause inflammation in the body. I was always a diet and exercise guy. Like, no, that handles it. But the other stuff, for sure. But the one thing, and I'll say it openly, is I'm 50 years old, right? And I say this to people. I say, I don't know if it's my brain tumor or the fact I'm just getting older or whatever, but I can't draw on things as much. Like,
the recall.
I'll forget somebody's name who I should know, like right off the bat, or I'm in the middle of a sentence and I lost it, and I'm like, oh my God, like
I know.
And I'm like,
that too. A lot of people do that, and I think we, especially us in this camp, right? We all think, oh, it's the brain tumor, and that was another Tracy thing. She'd be like, blame it on the brain tumor. But I don't know either if that's just our age, because I do the same thing with recall, and it drives me crazy because I'll see somebody and it's like, just can't, I can't get the name, and I know it. And then, I'll just like beat myself up, like, come on, all through and then finally it'll come to me. But yeah, so I know the short-term memory stuff or the recall can be tricky. I do think so. Yeah. Little things like that. I don't know though, I don't know if it's the brain tumor or having had treatment or if it's just what would have happened. Cause I too am going to be 50 this year. So at 50, maybe that's what happens. I don't need glasses, but I do use readers now because things look blurry.
One more thing I'll share though, and it's just because it's going on now.
Yeah.
And this is in honor of my brain tumor, right? So all my stuff happened like the October COVID, right? And so I don't know, like whenever you're listening to this, COVID was when it first happened, everything shut down, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't get a haircut for a long time. I couldn't get one. And
Right.
I was, oh my God, I'm growing my hair, right? I'm growing my hair. So I get a brain tumor, right? And I used to say this because I do a lot of Facebook Lives. I said, I guess God wants me to get a haircut. Do you know what I mean? And in reality, I didn't need to shave my head for it. They're like, oh, you don't need to. But I'm like, let's make it a little cleaner, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm on this. So it's a superstition. This is total superstition. I'll just throw it out there.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want to grow my hair again. So that, it's kind of like, I'm going to try to see what it looks like. But there's this thing in the back of my mind, like, I hope God doesn't make my skin, you know what I mean?
Right,
It's just
right.
really silly, stupid things,
I
right? But
know.
you
No.
gotta laugh about it.
Hey, you got to have fun with it, right? And that's the thing. Like those are the things that I know we come up with these things in our minds, and hey, it's okay. It's all good.
It's good. So tell me, like, you have shared so much amazing stuff today. So tell me a little bit. I want to leave some opportunity for you to talk about the Alliance and any things that you would like to share about that, because we share this. This gets shared for sure.
Sure, for sure. Yeah. So our next event is coming up May 14th. It's our annual event, the Connecticut Brain Tumor Alliance Path of Hope. It's a walk in West Hartford, Connecticut at Elizabeth Park. And we are online. We have a website, which is at ctbta.org. And we welcome anybody to come, to our community and help us our goal is to make Connecticut a center of excellence for brain tumor care. And we really have been working hard and are always looking for people to get involved, whether it's through, our board, where, like I said, we're an all volunteer board. We do have an office with donated office space, and we have one paid employee. But as far as new board members coming along, we're always looking for new board members, looking for people to have, that we call them third-party events. So if somebody wants to have their own event, have a little walk or a golf tournament, and then have it benefit the Connecticut Brain Tumor Alliance, we welcome that. And we have, guidelines set up for things like that. But we're a not-for-profit here in the state of Connecticut, and we're always looking for more people to help. So
yeah, Connecticut's my home.
Yeah, your home, right? We have another event coming up. I believe it is September 8th at the Stony Creek Brewery in Branford, Connecticut. And that's a fun event. If you haven't come, you should check that one out. It's a really good time. And so, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That is awesome.
Yeah.
And, I love what you guys are doing. I've talked to Greg, I've talked to Chris and some of the, members that are very active, and they've helped me. And, hopefully this podcast will help other people get the help and support that they need. Just, anything to really help. Also too, brain tumor, the podcast isn't just about brain tumors. It's about, going through some hard things for sure. And hopefully, people can learn and really start to, establish the hope and the support, because I think the support is great. So
yeah, congratulations to you. I mean, this is impressive that what you're doing. So I'm pretty inspired by what you've decided to do.
yeah, I figured, this is, I guess God tapped me on the shoulder and gave me some inspiration and said, hey, what can we do to help other people? Because there are some people that, are struggling, and there's, I reach out to friends in some of the online groups, I remember, some advice I got was don't do too much, but don't do too little. Because
Mhm,
I was in like every group and some of them were very scary. And
mhm,
now I've kind of narrowed them down to some that were, that were
right,
really awesome. And I find that there's people that reach out and so blessing and a curse, social media can be a blessing and a curse. It allows
true.
us to connect more and help others, which is nice, but sometimes it could go the other way. But
Yeah, that's great advice though, what you said, which is definitely even with everything, right? I mean, like you said, stress is a big cause of inflammation. And so we're always told to try to keep our stress low. And then, like you said, don't do too much, but don't do too little. So it's always like a juggle to find that balance, but it's great advice.
100%. Any final words, Jen?
I think that really does it.
Awesome. I so thank you for coming on today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I love that you're shining a light on brain tumors on behalf of the Connecticut Brain Tumor Alliance and your own experience and sharing. I think this is just really valuable.
Anytime. And I can't wait to help more and be more involved. And, even on national levels, this does go, all over. We've got people all over the world listening to these. So which is
That's great.
really, really
Yeah.
cool.
Well, I look forward to working with you more. Let's partner up and do some great things.
Sounds good. Sounds good.